Emmanuel Macron's tenure as the French president will go down one laden with civil order crises, Yellow Vest protests, pension reform row, and now the police shooting a teenager dead. These are visuals we're about to show you of what's happening on the streets of France. Protesters have set cars alight. In response, the police has fired several rounds of tear gas. At least 180 demonstrators have been arrested and 170 officers have sustained injuries. The riots have been on for the past 3 days. At least 40,000 police officers have been deployed across the country. President Macron has been holding one crisis meeting after another. He has branded the violence as unjustifiable and called for immediate calm. But in the same breath, he has also extended condolences for the victims' families.
I want to tell you that the government's response will be extremely firm, and from this evening, everyone must understand that the public order will be restored.
The anger has been mounting since the French police shot a teenage boy. The incident took place on the western outskirts of Paris. The 17-year-old Nahil M, a French-Algerian, was way too young to hold a full license, so he was driving a car illegally with 2 other passengers. 2 policemen on motorbikes spotted the car with the Polish number plate and attempted to stop it. The police say he refused to stop and sped past a red light. A chase followed, after which he was shot at point-blank range. The policeman who shot him, the police official who shot him is now being investigated for murder. Inquiry is still open against Nahal as well for resisting his arrest. To give you context, last year, a record 13 people were killed by French police after traffic stops. Right groups say the number of police shootings have increased since 2017. That was when the French government brought changes to its law. It broadened the framework for when officers can use firearms 2 weeks ago. A 19-year-old driver was shot dead by the police after allegedly hitting an officer in his legs. Residents of Nanterre say that they can smell the smoke in the air. Many have actually changed their plans of attending further protests out of fear. And there's still smashed glass on the roads, empty glass bottles that protesters threw at the police. Authorities are worried that tonight we'll see similar protests as the last 2. And for more on this now, we're being joined by Peter Klepp, who is the editor-in-chief of Brussels Report. Peter Klepp, thanks very much for talking to us this evening. How wise do you think it is to deploy 40,000 troops to clamp down on protests? Is there a better way to stop this from escalating? The government talking in one voice, giving out a message for peace and assuaging concerns of those who are protesting on the ground?
Well, now the French authorities do not have any other choice. You cannot allow chaos to fester. You have to think about the security of French citizens. And if that means deploying an overwhelming police force, I think that's what you need to do. The bigger question is, look, how do we prevent these kind of mass protests? And that, I think that's very difficult. In the last 20 years at least, probably longer, we have often seen these kind of protests in France. There's always a trigger. I haven't looked at the case in detail, but it looks indeed like the police person was not allowed to use lethal violence in this particular case. But I think there's always a trigger where you see these protests, where mostly people from an immigrant background are revolting. So we have to look much deeper. We have to, I think, realize that a lot of the anger is the result of the insufficient integration of certain minorities or certain parts of certain minorities into French society, which makes them more susceptible to these kind of riots when grievances come to the fore.
Right. But Macron's presidency in many ways has been plagued by protests that very often spiral out of control. Has the messaging always been right from the government? In this case too, the French Justice Minister has outrightly defended the police and the law enforcement. That doesn't help when the situation is going out of control.
Look, I think it's very difficult to make a big pronouncement if you do not have all the facts. Probably actually the government and the justice minister should also, trust the judicial authorities to conduct an investigation, and then it will be resolved in this way. I think that's the best way to go about this. In any case, you cannot compromise on safety. If you see that certain youth are planning to rebel and to cause a lot of damage, then I think it's the job of the police authorities to make very clear that this is not going to happen, and to use violence if controlled police violence if necessary. I don't think there's any other alternative to that on the very short term. But again, we have to look at the deeper roots of the problem, and it's not just in France, it's throughout Western Europe that we see challenges to integrate certain minorities into society. I don't think it would be right to give any simple solution. This is clearly very, very complex. But I do believe that ultimately economic integration is the key. You have to make sure that people work. You have to make sure that also female immigrants, that they don't just sit at home, that they are integrated into society, maybe a part-time job. I think that's all very important, and partially because of the welfare systems that we have in Western Europe, many people that could perfectly be employed are not working, and this does not help their integration if these people are immigrants.
Right, Peter Klipp. Thanks very much indeed for joining us with your thoughts on what this really is about, a complex issue that also requires a larger integration of certain minorities and is often spiraled out of control. Peter Klipp, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.